Live now. Can you see it? Once we get started, I'll get you to turn that around. Okay, so you can turn around now. Otherwise, that'll confuse me. So we'll just give Jamie a minute to put the link up. We'll be good to get started. It locks though. Leave it, Shannon. We're going to start. Okay, good evening everyone, and welcome to the third in the series of live webinars that Rugby Australia is running this year. Welcome to everyone that's in the room down here in Melbourne. We've got a good crowd here, and they'll be involved in the session this evening. Welcome also to everyone that's tuning in online. Hopefully this is coming through okay. Look, I'll just say there'll be an opportunity for you to ask questions, and feel free to type those questions as the webinar continues this evening, and Jamie will get those questions to me and we'll take time at the end of the webinar to answer those. So don't fear, you don't need to look at me all evening. So for those of you that don't know me, my name's Shane Barr and I look after the referees in the southern states, working for Jamie. So this evening's webinar, as I said, refereeing conflict in under-19 rugby. The session will go along the lines of a little bit of background and hopefully some tools that people are able to use and put into practice. And then a series of scenarios that we'll work our way through, look at what works well in those scenarios, what maybe we could improve, hopefully give a whole heap of scenario experience that maybe people can apply to their own refereeing when they head out there on the weekend. So what is conflict and why do we even care about it? So conflict, a serious disagreement and argument about something that's important and really underpinned by emotion, and that's where it's important for us to understand those emotions and what may be leading to the conflict in the first instance. And that's really an important part for us to play and to be connected right from the first whistle to make sure we understand what might be leading to some of those emotions that we're seeing out in the field, which will hopefully allow us to manage some of those conflict situations a little better. Certainly at times where we lack empathy, that will contribute to whatever conflict might be commencing, growing, or really building in the game. So, and then of course, empathy is an important part of our conflict management toolkit. What do we care about it? Well, realistically, conflict that might begin between a couple of players from opposing sides can easily extend to their teammates, and we end up with a full-scale involvement or a brawl. So really getting on top of that conflict as early as possible is important for us to make sure that we get it resolved as much as we can and people feel less aggrieved about what's happening, and it sort of stops it building from there. So that's why it's important, and that's why we think it's an important component of what we bring to the game as referees. So just a couple of dot points from Elaine Roland, who ex-international ref, still working heavily in the referee area. Just highlighted 4 skills that he's learned as a rugby referee that he's now taken into his workplace. I think these are really important and helpful, and I think conflict management is exactly that, something that we can improve our skills as referees and really applies not just in the workplace but at home. Conflicts appear everywhere, and it's important that we understand and have different tools to try and manage that. So preparation is key, unsurprisingly. So I think, you know, right from this webinar right now, hopefully people are taking away some information this evening that helps them to prepare for the game. But most importantly, when that game commences, as soon as there's any sort of event or instance of conflict, we get in and we stamp that out immediately and set the tone for the rest of the game. It's important that we appear to be in control when sometimes the environment around us is chaotic, right? So being prepared is just that, thinking about what I need to say at different times, thinking about how I'll manage different scenarios, and having some of those tools is important. So being ready is absolutely important. Staying calm under pressure. So it's important, and we'll talk about a couple of different things later in this webinar, but you know, sometimes it's tempting for us to snap back at someone who's starting to get involved in some conflict and bite back and get involved in that sort of way. But more importantly, managing our own emotions and remaining calm is important if we're going to diffuse some of that conflict that's arising. So staying calm under pressure is important. And, you know, that ties in beautifully with that first point where preparation is key. If we can be prepared, that will help us to stay calm when the pressure comes on. The third point Elaine talks about is recognising others' emotions. So really understanding what that player might be bringing to the game on the day. Is there something that perhaps happened in back play that's heightened his emotions and he's feeling a little bit angry that wasn't dealt with? So really having a good understanding of that is important. And that's where our communication needs to come in. Not just our verbal communication, but our body language, all those sort of extrasensory things where we're understanding what might be building to a player's frustration so that we can help to understand why they're getting to the point that they are. The last point that he talks about is being flexible. And this isn't about rolling over at every opportunity and just ignoring some things that are happening, but there are times in a game where we can exercise a bit of flexibility. It might be that you're aware that you've made an error, and using that as a positive tool to allay their frustrations can be an effective way to manage some conflict. So, you know, there's times in a game that we may need to be flexible. This is not an invitation to lose authority over what's happening in the game, but certainly a time to think about when you can be flexible and think about the tactics that help you get to the end game, which is to diffuse any conflict. So I thought 4 dot points there that are really helpful, not just on the rugby pitch, but in the workplace, at home, wherever really. And I can't highlight enough numbers 1 and 2 about being prepared and knowing what you're going to do in certain situations, and then 2, staying calm under pressure. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. I think I just want to get rid of that. So this is Thomas and Kilman's conflict instrument, and don't be overawed by it. We'll work our way around each of it. But if we were to look up the left-hand side of this, this is the importance of the issue. How important is the issue that needs resolving? And it can be likened to how assertive we need to be in trying to resolve that conflict. Across the bottom here, moving from left to right, is the importance of the relationship. So how cooperative do we want to be in trying to solve that conflict? So there's 5 areas there, and we're just going to work our way through each of those and talk about a couple of dot points with each. So if I look at avoiding, you know, and liken this back to a game of rugby, these are trivial issues that sometimes can be overlooked. So a penalty, for example, that's blown against a player who thought he was absolutely legal, that initial frustration that he has is certainly something that we may be able to leave alone. The problem comes when we start avoiding things that do need addressing. So, you know, The importance of the issue is low, the importance of the relationship is low, but if we continue to avoid things, we end up heightening the conflict or increasing the amount of conflict that could unfold there. When we avoid the issue, nothing's resolved with the conflict. Everyone's gone away thinking that their part hasn't been solved. So it's an important thing for us to understand. Certainly, each of these items as we go through them have a moment for us to use as conflict management tool. Some will be good in some circumstances and others not so good in other. If we then talk about accommodating, you know, as I said before, there's times where we make mistakes in some of our decisions. And sometimes we can use that as a positive in building a relationship. Understanding when we've missed something or made an erroneous call is something that we may be able to use further to improve the relationship between the captain during that discussion. That might help to just limit the damage of the conflict. So an important thing is to be able to accommodate. And when I'm talking about these, both parties need to be doing this. So whether you're dealing with referee as a captain or a coach or a ground marshal or even a player, each of these can be used. So both parties have a part to play in that. If we then think that the importance of the relationship is high, so we're down the right-hand side of this scale now, and we also think the importance of the issue is high, then we move into this collaboration environment where we're really using input from both parties to try and resolve some conflict. So if we think about this in terms of our escalation during a game, and we call the captain out, this might be a time where we do a little bit of giving and taking. We give the time for the captain to have their say on some issues that they're seeing, and then we give our information of an issue or a trend that we're seeing, and there's that collaboration in trying to get to an end result. So both parties seeing the issue is important, but not at the expense of the relationship. So really a bit of give and take in that environment. If we're prepared to sacrifice the relationship a little bit, so we're now down the lower end of the scale of the importance of the relationship, but it's important that the issue needs resolving, then we're in this competing section here. And there are times absolutely when we need to work in this, right? So where we need quick, decisive action that's going to diffuse and separate something that's happened, it may be some time for us to be authoritative and sacrifice a little bit of that relationship building to make sure that we diffuse whatever's happening there. So we just need to be aware of what further conflict that could bring down the track. The last point, and you know, whilst it looks like this is the best of all and the combination of all, there's time and place for each of these, as I said, is a compromising environment where we're working together to get an outcome. So again, working with the captains of both teams to try and get the best outcome for the game and to limit the amount of conflict that we might see. So as we go through the scenarios, we'll refer back to the Thomas and Kilman conflict stuff and think about what each approach that the referee used in that scenario, where it might fit in this sort of instrument. So this presentation is targeted at refereeing in the under-19 environment. And I guess they bring their own challenges. And some of these aren't just under-19s. Certainly we see that in senior rugby as well. So, but you know, I think a couple of key points for us that we do want to do when we're refereeing in the under-19 environment, and that is, of course, stay calm, as I mentioned earlier. So absolutely key in our preparation and getting in the right headspace to do that when we arrive at the ground, regardless of what's going on in the home environment, is going to be important. So staying calm will allow us to best manage our conflict. Where we can, provide a little bit of praise. If you've asked someone to do something and they've effectively done it, a little bit of thank you or that sort of thing certainly doesn't go astray, particularly in the under-19 environment. You might choose not to use that in the senior environment, although I don't see why not, but certainly in the under-19s, it's effective in that relationship building. The third dot point there is using humour, and I've got an asterisk against that because we need to be very careful using humour in this environment. So we'll see in the don't column that comes up in a second why I've got that asterisk there. So if we just park that for a sec, I'm pretty sure you all know what's coming. Be prepared to ignore the poor comms that's coming back from the player that you're talking to, okay? The shrugs, the looking away, the rolled eyes, all those sorts of things are teenagers. So, you know, we need to be a little bit empathetic in that regard and not get riled by their lack of attention or their perceived lack of attention. Okay, so we might extend the olive branch a little bit more when we're working with these teenagers. Where we get the point of, you know, warning time, that's our time to set some boundaries, particularly with our captain, and give them that opportunity to take a message back. That's our time to set some boundaries so that they know what they can operate in. Teenagers love to know what the boundaries are. They also love to push them. But if we don't set them and be clear about them, then we kind of leave ourselves a little bit open to inflaming situations, and then we've got more conflict to manage. So there's some do's of managing behaviour of under 19s. I'm pretty sure you can imagine what the don'ts look like, but here they are. So arguing with them is not going to get either party anywhere, okay? We're just heating and inflaming the conflict right there. Being defensive about our decisions, I spoke about, we're going to make errors, and owning those and using those in a positive way can be really powerful. So think about how you might be able to use your errors to build a positive relationship, as opposed to being defensive, which again will heighten the conflict. Nagging, sarcasm, mocking, ridiculing, all fits in the asterisk that I was talking about earlier, right? So any of that sort of stuff, even with the best intention, can be completely misconstrued and taken the wrong way. And all you've done is the exact opposite of what you're trying to do, which was build a relationship, and you've broken it down. The last dot point there is don't be dismissive. So give them the chance to have their say and hear them out within reason. So I think that there's some important things there that whether we are a teenage referee ourselves, or whether we're a more mature referee who referees juniors on a regular basis, I think it's really important that we're aware of some do's and don'ts with teenagers. It's a really fragile time in their life where, you know, they're undergoing a fair bit of change themselves, and being respectful of that and trying to work with that is important for us as referees. So by no means this is a checklist for our teenage referees. This is for everyone who's in that teenage environment and refereeing those. A lot of you will have seen this information before about, you know, maintaining a blue head, okay? And this is not just for us as referees, it's us understanding players and where they're at as well, right? So this came about from a bloke called Evans, and he's done a lot of work with the All Blacks, particularly in those pressure and performance environments. And, you know, ideally staying in that blue head space on the left of the screen there, where we can be in the moment, calm, clear, accurate, and on task. As a referee, that's great if we can maintain that sort of area, right? Equally for players. If players can be on their task and just keeping going about their business, calm and clear about what their job is on the day, this is a great spot for everyone to be in. The reality is, it's not where we stay through 80 minutes of football, right? So inevitably this red head pokes up, and we start worrying about, you know, being results orientated, overcompensating, anxious, aggressive, all those sort of traits that start to come through. And the first step of this is just having some awareness about it, right? So again, not only for us as referees, but also for our players. And quite often we can turn up at games in the redhead space immediately. So we need to be trying to give ourselves enough time if things haven't been going so well at home or in the workplace, or you're just tired, giving ourselves the time to try and get ready for the game and move ourselves into that blue head space so that we can think clearly, stay calm, and take the time to deal with whatever's presented. So I think that's just an important awareness tool for us to have in the kit. Look, just in terms of process when we're dealing with a conflict, you know, there's 4 dot points here. They don't always have to happen in this order, but most certainly we need to take our time. Take the time to get the information that we need, process what you've seen, talk to any other match officials that are involved, your AIs or whatever. Take that time to really formulate what it was that happened at that moment that you want to try and unravel and understand what happened. So I think that's an important key. This second part goes hand in hand, and that's finding some space. This isn't just about separating teams, but it absolutely is an important thing for us to do, and we'll see that in some clips in a second. But it's finding some space for yourself as well, right? So if there's a conflict that's turned into some push and shove, where a lot of the teams are involved, there's no sense in us being in the middle of that and trying to separate players. We are not giving ourselves any perspective for arriving players coming from 20 metres away that escalate situations. Give yourself some space and some depth and perspective that allows you to take in all the information that's presented. Time and time again, we see referees right in the middle of it. You're not giving yourself space to process what happened initially and started the whole thing, and you're not giving yourself space to see what might be escalating it, and things could be happening behind your back. Once things have died down, we also need the time and space just to process everything that happened, and usually talking to an AR or a touch judge even is a good time to do that. I can hear everyone thinking, what are we doing with a touch judge? Let's get back to that soon enough. Once we've taken the time and the space and we've processed everything, we can then arrive at a decision, okay? So only once we've taken the time and the space can we formulate what's happened, and now think and even verbalise to our ARs or our touch judges what it is that the decision needs to be. And the thing that kind of ties this all together is our comms. So how we communicate this back to the teams, what our decision is absolutely critical. And we'll see a couple of scenarios in a second that really highlight what works well and, what could be improved. So we'll keep coming back to this process, but always be thinking about taking the time, finding some space. That's that whole being calm bit that we spoke about earlier. That allows us to have a clear enough head, the blue head, to arrive at a decision and then be able to communicate that. Okay, enough theory. So let's get to some scenarios. These are the scenarios that we're going to go through. There's a number of clips in each of the scenarios. We'll just work our way through those. For those of you who are online, feel free to type some questions in. The people in the room here we might use them to try and highlight what worked well and maybe what we could do differently in each of the clips and work our way through that. I'll just repeat what's been said in case the audio doesn't come through as well as it might. All right, so here we are starting out with just an incident of foul play. So I think this one's pretty clear. I'll play the video, and then in case there's some streaming dramas going on, I'll just explain what happened in the video. So first video coming along now.
Come here, please. 20, let it go. 12, let it go. Let it go. 20, please, and captain. 20 and captain. 20. No, he's strapping his feet first to kick the guy. I can't do anything. Who? You sure it was foot? Yes, I'm sure it was foot. Okay. Can we, right? Dangerous play.
Okay, so that scenario, we had 20 from White moving up in the defensive line and just throws his foot out and contacts the red player in the groin, and then the referee makes his decision and kind of walks away, and then there's a little bit of push and shove, and then he delivers his message to the captain, which is a red card. So just from around the room, what do you think worked well in that situation? Yep, so immediate response, strong ownership of decision-making time, good. Anything else? Cool, some clear instruction from the argy-bargy that happened. Anything else that we saw as positive there? Yeah, so the delivery of the message to the captain and quietening that that request down pretty quickly. What about anything there that we might want our referee to do differently? Good. So 12 from Red, who throws the ball at him and then starts a little bit of push and shove. We may have had a word to him. Anything else? Good. I think, yeah, finding his own space as a referee and then getting the team separated is probably something that we'd like to see a little bit more of there, okay? Good. So the time and space that we'd like to get is probably the improvement there. In terms of decision and communication to captain, pretty good there, right? Okay. Let's have a look at this next video. I'll play the video and then I'll give a brief explanation of what happened. There's no audio for this video. Okay, so what happened there was we had a collapsed scrum. The white player in the headgear gets up and appears to grab and throw to ground the opposition lock. And then the referee blows time off, makes an effort to find some space there. We're looking end on. I would say there's probably not much space involved there. And then delivers a yellow card to the white player with the headgear. He starts to walk off. The red guys are inciting him, and he comes back and throws one at the red player, who then responds with a little bit of his own. A bit of push and shove. And then we have a red card for the initial white player in the headgear and a yellow card for the red player. So moving reasonably quickly, what worked well there? Good. So, absolutely. So there was an attempt to move red back, right? Good. Good. Cool. So I don't want to labour the point too much. What could we do differently there? Definitely space, right? So, you know, the space really there is what leads to the red card. The red team are so close to the other team that they're able to keep taunting that player, and that player still has access to the red team so that he can go back and throw his punch. No.
Look like there was chat before the push and shove as well, because obviously something going on at the scrum.
So, you know, I think this clip absolutely reiterates the importance of finding some time and space and getting the space of the separation of the teams. Okay, it's absolutely possible that we could have avoided the red card there if we'd managed that space. Let's have a look at this next clip. It goes for about 3 minutes, so a bit of time to get through the whole thing. So I'll play it and then I'll explain what happened briefly.
Let it go, let it go, let it go. Just watch that.
Just get those two numbers. I've seen punches, mate. Can you just get them both? We're just going to play this out. Thanks, guys. Well done. Time is up. All right. Time's off. Hey, I'm going to come have a chat to you both, right? Just fill this down. Good discipline, boys. Awesome, brother. Guys, if you just go to the try line for me, you guys just stay here. You guys just stay here. Just if you can just go back to the try line for me. Please. You just keep the team over there for me. I'm just going to have a chat with each of the face. Oh, I've got two clear punches. I don't know where they're connected. I think they'll both just carry on. So I've definitely got 8 black, 13 green. Okay. Now, did they carry on with a few more punches after that? Yes. Okay, so we've had multiple punches. So I think they can both go to the main card. I don't know what started it. Come back down here and we'll start one out as it went out. You heard that? Sure. Dave, do you have anything to add to that? Okay, so black number 8, green 13. Great, excellent. Matt, can I have you? Tom, can I have you, please? So, guys, you're both going to go off the red cards. Now, I need this to stay calm when I do it. All right, so I'm going to put your player in the first, and then you'll go second. All right, let's make sure nothing goes on the wall. So, number 8, please. Yeah, punching. Punching. And 13. How was that fair? Result's going to be we play here, and we're just going to play more. Nice and calm. Line out here, green ball. Green ball. Time is on.
So just a quick wrap up in there, a couple of players throwing some punches at each other in the background. The referee continues to play and play goes into touch. He blows time off, sends the green team back to the try line, separates the black team, talks to the AR, then comes back, calls both captains out, communicates what's going to happen. And then he deals with one side and sends that player off in one direction, and then deals with the other side and sends that player off in the other direction, and then restarts where the ball went into touch. So, just again, quickly, what worked well there? So, just to be clear what was said there, great use of space. Obviously, that's the highlight of that interaction, is the use of space. The other comment was great use of the ARs to keep an eye on what's happening in the background. So what could we do differently there? Good. Yeah, so the other positive there is time. So the time and space component of that, gathering all the information was well done. What could we do differently there? Anything?
If it continued on, we then had a late hit by 10 green just before the line out. So there's potential for that to escalate, those two to start fighting. Guy Drake, the touch was probably high. He might get up and react. He might have 3 fights. It was clearly continuing. You want to keep an eye when it's not dying down.
Good.
It was just foul play after foul play.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sure some of you are sitting here right now going, I thought this was meant to be an under-19 presentation. All we've seen is senior clips so far. Work with me. There'll be some juniors coming. But, you know, particularly in junior rugby, playing advantage off foul play is probably not what we're going to do, right? So there's every opportunity that this could have escalated even further instead of just the 2 blokes that were throwing punches at each other. So perhaps we could have stopped that immediately and just restarted with the scrum. If we're unclear who started it, we could have just like he's done with the line out there, we could have just restarted with the scrum back. Okay. So probably the only thing that we might do differently there. So just so you know what the laughing's about, it's a recommendation that the AR should provide the report and the recommendation so that he has to do it. But really, you know, even if you don't have ARs and you're refereeing junior rugby on a weekend, the creation of time and space there is a great example of just how well you can diffuse what could be a real trigger in a game.
Telling the captain one of the times.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps he could have told the captains why he was going to red card them. I think, you know, for black, the captain there goes, why are they going off? Hopefully they would know, but perhaps he could have told them that this would happen. Absolutely. Absolutely. So when you compare that to the first clip that we had, which was the immediate whistle, the kick to the groin, taking control of that situation immediately. So we're now onto some clips of escalating tensions. So this is a junior rugby game. All three clips are from the same game. And we'll just watch as they unfold. I'll explain each clip as we go along.
Step, please, stay. Backhand, guys. Captain. 18. Stay there. There was no attempt at arms there. Yellow. Come on, Red. That wasn't. We're putting that hit on. Come on now.
Good, so just continue the theme. What's worked well there? Space, good. Time, good comms. To the captain, not at the player who's already angry and sorry, I should just explain the video in case there's some streaming issues. Basically a green player hitting it up, wide 18, shoulder charge, and then does a bit of a flop on top of him as well. Referee blows a whistle immediately, gets a separation, and goes through a process. Good. Yep, absolutely. So absolutely stayed calm through that process. Didn't utilise his ARs, midfield, he saw it clearly, maybe unnecessary there. Okay. Let's have a look at this second one. I will point something out in this video so you see it clearly. The green halfback, number 24, I'd be interested to see and discuss what the actions of him in this video are, because I think you'll see what the other actions are.
Get back. Where was back? What do you see? I didn't see the initial. I saw 8 coming in and swinging. Yep. Then I saw 11. 11 coming in and just a bit of push and shove. 8 right. Recommended. Yep. They did 8. And then I very soon here they told them what happened. Get back. So I have my back turn on it. I didn't see much.
I didn't see anything, so it's not worth it. Yeah.
Right. So what did you see? You saw number 8 white? Take a swing? White. Swing. Okay. Captain, number 8. There's been a scuffle. My told me that number 8 took swing, didn't connect, just yelling. No, sir, what about the one in the rock? You hit him in the rock, sir. Well, number 5 got punched out. Guys, get back. Hey, Joe, come in. Who's the halfback? He's gone off. He's gone off. Because he got punched by number 5, sir. Yep. Right. No, it's fine. That's what we know, we got punched out. Okay, cool.
The short summary of that video is the green halfback takes the ball out of the ruck, pushes in the back the player that's on the ground, who's a large lump of a lad, and then goes away. That lump of a lad then gets to his feet and sorts him out. Then there's some push and shove, and it goes from there. So, what worked well? So eventually gets them separated. Good. So he battled for space. He battled for time. So let's look at it. What could he do differently there? 100%. So that comment was that he was right in the middle of that scuffle, and the AR waving his flag in there as well. Good. So and this is that understanding what's driving the emotion thing, right? So we've already got a white team that's heightened after the yellow card. Then this incident happens, which is in retaliation to a little bit of stirring. So now the white team are feeling aggrieved, and none of us as match officials have picked any of that up. Okay, so you can see how the white team starts to take things into their own hands, and we get to this situation here.
One person probably referee dismissing white jackets.
Yeah, absolutely.
But he's leaving white jackets. The question is here. He's lost white jackets.
And then
he lost him already. Yeah.
Sure. And then I think we arrive at this discussion about the green halfback, right? All of a sudden, he starts asking where the green halfback is. And then because he's off, he just does nothing in the end. So where that was headed, who only knows? So let's just keep moving along. Here's the next video in the sequence of the same game.
Hold on, guys. Hold on. You're off. What are you talking about? You're getting off, yeah? Wait, just look at the scoreboard, boy. 15 is that, boy. 15 is all that up, boy. It's fair play with Victor, boy. Boy, that's why it's just shoot. Hold on. How can be a high tackle if you fell over? If he didn't fall over, we're living something more.
So he ends that game early, just for clarity. So what happens there is a green player is taking the ball up. There's a high tackle. What looks on the video is a massive swing at him is actually the player trying to rip the ball out of his possession. And then the referee blows his whistle and says, "That'll do, we've had enough, fellas." So I think, a great example of, had we dealt with the situation that had aggrieved the team earlier, we may have been a long way better down the path of resolving some conflict and reducing some tension. And then I think the important message out of this is, yes, absolutely ending a game early is an option to us as referees, but we'd want to see a significant height in tension or difference to what's been happening for us to get to that point. as opposed to just going, I'm out. This is too hard for me. So, you know, the ability for that referee to stay in a blue headspace and stay calm was very difficult, right? So I think that's just a really important thing. And, you know, could he have used the two captains at the end of the second video to get some collaboration happening, to get some buy-in, get a reset, and try to keep the game going? The last thing we want to be doing is blowing full time early. This is not a message that that's not an opportunity for us if the game deserves that. Okay, so I think, you know, classic junior rugby there, right? I think they're 14s. 16, I believe. Correct, which the AR points out. Look, I'm just mindful of time, so I'm going to move on, but I think we can see there the importance of time, space, clear headspace. Okay, we're going to see some team versus team involvements now, and I'm probably going to move a little bit faster.
Watch it. Flipping tackle, 10 metres. Bring it up, boys. I know exactly what I saw. It's fine. All good. Thank you. You're up, Brian. I know exactly what I saw. Forward. Yeah, all good. Thanks. All right. Kicker. Here's the line. All right. Well, time off. Probably have 6 and captain, please. Like the whole team run over Spectator. Do you understand that? I understand that, all right. However, in that circumstance, it was a late tackle. A late tackle? Very late tackle. Take him above the horizontal. You're lucky you didn't land on his shoulders or his head. It's going to have to be a yellow.
So I'm just mindful of time. I'll just give a quick summary there. There's a penalty for a lifting tackle, quick tap, and then a draw and pass out wide, which results in a late lifting tackle past the horizontal. I think the important part of this clip is not that the referee didn't see it, but the ARs come to give him some information, and he kind of dismisses them and says, I've got it under control. And then we ended up seeing another interaction with the AR to find out a little bit more involvement later on in the scene. So had he taken the time to get that information in, and I think this is a good time to talk about touch judges and how that information might be used. So when I say touch judge, I mean not accredited AR. You know, certainly it's reasonable for us to listen to what a touch judge has got to say to help build our picture, but certainly we're not using their information as an accredited AR, if that makes sense. So don't be afraid to take the time to have a chat to a touch judge, even if it's buying you that extra time yourself to process what you're thinking. Okay, so perfectly reasonable to do that in that situation. So, you know, a classic example where some time and space was gathered, however, some information offered that was dismissed. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Let's have a look at this team versus team involvement here.
Leave it. Leave it, no, leave it! Stop, leave it. Leave it. Leave it, boy. Leave it. Throw. No, you take your guys back. Take him back first, mate. Say right away, Captain. Say what, mate. Right, so obviously we've got a big all in towards the end there. I haven't seen what started. Have you got anything that started that morning? At the back, all right. So we sort of had Uni get up and then a bit of celebration, obviously getting the penalty. Yep. Okay. I haven't seen any clear striking in that instance there. Okay. But then we've got multiple different players. I haven't seen a clear strike in the face of those players. We've had obviously been multiple different players. So you guys coming to that initial start was Uni getting a bit inside. Nothing thrown clearly that I could see. But it was Uni sort of excitement that lifted the temperature. Okay, both captains, please. Now we're literally 3 minutes into this game, guys. Okay, we haven't seen what started that there. I mean, in my opinion, both sides are equally involved. Okay, now what I need to make very clear though now is that is completely unacceptable. Okay, if we're standing like that again, we'll be looking for people and they'll be sitting down. Okay, that's where it stops. Take the time now and have the chat. I'll wait for you. Mark's over here.
So the video, scrum penalty, the penalty that was awarded to that team gets all excited, do their pat on the heads and stir everyone up. Then we ended up with a whole heap of push and shove, breaking out. Perhaps a little bit more space would have been good for the officials there. I think maybe a little bit too close to what's unfolding there. Yeah, and then but then from there, pretty good outcome, right? Got good separation of the teams. Really reinforced that separation. Took the time to speak to the ARs. Understood that there's no punches seen, though it looks pretty ugly in the push and shove. Nothing seen there. The other AR has nothing. And then the referee calls out both captains. And this is really that sort of collaborating environment now where he puts the onus back on the captains. 3 minutes in we are when this happens. And he says, that's the end of it. Take the time to take the message back to your captains. So in terms of process, you can see that referee pretty clear blue headspace through that whole thing there. So I think a pretty good example overall of, no sanctions required because we haven't seen anything, but a good example of how we can manage a situation in terms of using our time and space and comps to the captains. So the next series of videos, I'm mindful this is probably going to go over an hour, so I'll move through them reasonably quickly, but I think it's important for us to touch on them again to provide some scenarios that people might use. So I think we've probably got about 10 minutes left in this. So I thank the Rugby Vic guys for helping me out with these mock scenarios. Actors, we will never be. But I'll just play the videos and I'll talk our way through it. I'll probably just stop the positive and negative stuff and I'll just give an explanation of what I'm seeing here. So first up, we've got our pesky number 9 and our referee having a bit of an interaction.
Sir, off their feet, sir!
So our pesky number 9, the usual off our feet stuff, but then he decides to tell him what he thinks about our referee. So, this is our classic avoiding situation here, right? So we're ignoring the issue. That player thinks it's A-OK to keep behaving like that. So you know, whilst you might get away with it in certain circumstances, if it was just the off your feet chat or frustration at penalty, maybe okay to a bit of avoiding at that point. You could even call that a little bit of accommodating, right? But, you know, once he gets to telling her what he thinks about her, then we're ignoring the issue that needs some attention. Yeah, well, yeah, that's sometimes the response that comes out.
Sir, off their feet, sir! Referee. Yeah.
Number 9, come here. Do I think to enough or I will find.
So the extension to this is that the referee, and I'm sure Jamie's sitting there going, tuck your shirt in and all that sort of stuff. But thank you, Erica, for doing the job. Goes chasing the number 9, right? And starts waving her finger at him like front on confrontation sort of stuff and says, cut that, do not speak to me like that again or I will card you, okay? So, you know, here's our competing area. If we go back to our Thomas Kilman thing from earlier, this is absolutely confrontational. No one's winning in that situation and the player is just severely frustrated. So we absolutely don't want to see this reaction. Let's have a look at this now. Our halfback's done his little do.
This referee shit out.
Look, I get he's frustrated, but I can't have him talking like that or feel escalated.
I'll have a word.
Thank you, JC. I'm sure you weren't going to have a word to that guy, but anyway, you know, what's great about Erica there is time off, doesn't go chasing the halfback, goes and talks to the captain, delivers the message very calmly. Just a minor thing when we're talking to teenagers, getting that sort of 45 degrees on as opposed to that confrontation thing is really important. Maybe we could get rid of the hands on hips, but, you know, like generally she's very calm and delivers the message and says that she can't take any more of that. It's that real boundary setting that I spoke about earlier. So the player then receives a message from his captain, which is a much better environment than us inflaming. Okay, so really encourage our referees to utilise our captain in that environment. So the competing one where she's confrontational, no thank you. The avoiding one in some circumstances, maybe you can get away with, but be mindful of what happens once it gets to that point where he's out of line. We need to deal with it. And then the last one we're thinking is a pretty good response overall, okay? Here's our coach and our referee, and we're headed to the car park. So full time, referee's got her bag, she's packed up, ready to go, and the coach a little passive aggressive here.
Yeah, not 50-50 if you go our way today.
Well, what do you think I could have done better then?
How about read the law book? You know enough sideline
Okay, so here we have our referee who takes the situation on. So he confronts him and says, what could I have done better then? And really, you know, doesn't deal with the situation in a positive manner because now the coach has walked away thinking he can do that again next week. Okay, so have a look at this second video. So there was the referee being confrontational and getting in a to and fro, okay?
See if we got the 50-50s, he might have been in the game. Don't you know the offside line? You looked in the law book lately? See, where's knock on, that's when you've got the ball, ref.
So here's our classic avoiding behaviour here, right? So it's got out of hand, right? We can't just walk away from that. And whilst it avoided inflaming the situation, and this might be okay if the person doesn't want to deal with it there and then goes and uses our report a concern option on the Rugby AU website. This would be an orange light for us. We could get away with it. But really, if we don't deal with it there and then, that coach isn't getting the immediate feedback that his behaviour is out of line.
Yeah, it would have been good if we got a 50-50 call today.
You know what an offside line is? You drop the ball, it's a knock on, ref. That's all I'm saying, it's a knock on.
Calm down a bit for me. Thank you.
So here we've got our referee who's getting the same sort of approach as she walks to the car. And once it gets to that limit, she then goes and engages someone from the club. So this is what we would expect is a good approach to this situation, where you're dealing with it in a timely manner. We're still going to report a concern to make sure that it's followed up reasonably. So we're still going to the website, but right there and then that coach knows that his behaviour is out of line. But we didn't take it on ourselves and confront the person. We used a club official, the ground marshal, someone that works at the club to you know, work through that situation for us. Any comments about that sort of approach? So hopefully there's some approaches there that we can use. So that first one where you get into a to and fro, not what we want to do. The second one you might be able to get away with if you're at the car and you just want to lodge the report later on. Not ideal. The last one is what we'd be looking for there. Last slide. So now we've got our spectator. Here we go. Here's our spectator.
They're offside. That's a ruck. What's going on? Come on, ref. You're a cheat.
Can you stop yelling at me? Do you think you can do a better job?
Probably could, but I don't want it.
So we've got our abusive spectator. He gets to the point where he says you're a cheat. Erica blows time off, comes over very confrontational, face to face, throws a whistle in his face and says, can you do a better job? Now, I've heard any amount of senior refs say that's an effective way of spectator management. No. It may have worked at times, but that's not how we want to approach this, particularly if you're a teenage referee, right? That's just not something you're going to do. Okay, so very confrontational. All this does is encourage the spectator to give you a bit more feedback. Okay, let's look at this approach. So this is not an orange light approach. This will be something that we think is reasonable.
Ref, they're offside. They've been doing it all day. It's a ruck. Come on. You're a cheat.
Time off. Come on. I can't have it.
Yep, I'll go for it. Yeah, mate, there you go. Oh, good, thank you. Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah, obviously it's pretty bad.
So the same setup. Erica blows time off and goes across and gets the ground marshal and says, I can't have him talking to me like that. Can you please sort it out? The ground marshal goes over. We're less interested in how that relationship works, but, you know, hopefully a ground marshal will go over and build a bit of a relationship first before they then tell them to cool their jets a little bit. So we've avoided inflaming the situation. The spectator knows immediately, and then we've got the ground marshal involved. So then if the behaviour continues, then this is this video here.
Oh, ref, you have not improved. It just has not got any better. You're still a cheat.
Time off. I'm going to stay off until
Oh, okay. I'm going.
So in this last one, this is an escalation. And if you couldn't hear what Erica said, then she went over and she said, time is staying off until that spectator leaves the venue. So we've given them the warning, we've worked through the ground marshal, and now we've said the game's stopped until that spectator leaves, okay? So everything done through the ground marshal, non-confrontational, but we've got to a limit where something has to give and we want that spectator to leave. And then the club's involved with what needs to happen out of that, okay? Confrontation, no thank you, let's avoid that. And the last two, yes please, okay? So I was going to take questions. I've gone for an hour and I promised Jamie I wouldn't do that. Maybe there's some questions online as well. We will answer those in another way. We might continue a discussion now here locally, but that will be the end of the webinar. So thanks everyone for tuning in. I hope you've been able to get something out of that. I really do hope, I really do hope you've been able to get some tools or some situational awareness that you might be able to use when you go out there on the weekend with under 19s. Really, key point for me is finding that time and space to give you the time to think logically about what you observed and what you should do, and then make your decision and communicate reasonably and positively with the captain to get some change in behaviour there. Really trying to keep that blue head through the whole thing and stay as calm as possible. And you'll do that by being prepared. So hopefully a little bit of this helps with your preparation. Go and practice what it is you're going to say. I know it sounds ridiculous, but the more we practice what we're going to say, we're in that pressure environment, the words come out much better. So clear, concise, simple comms is absolutely key to delivering that message. So thanks everyone, and that's the end of the webinar.